Thank you very much, EASA. I don't know how this will sound. If the sound is very bad, please say something. I'm very honored to be one of the presenters of you guys in Madrid. I hope you're having a nice time. Thank you for coming. And contrary to expectations, probably I will not talk very much about either Factoría or the film. Rather, I will explain more or less how did I get to make two things that are very, very different, very, very disparate, and somehow unexpected for an architect. So how is it that that one arrives to make both an architectural work and a film around the same time? So that I think the process of getting there is probably more useful to you than to just see the same information over and over again. So I will explain more or less what my trajectory was from probably for the last 20 years, and I will present a few, more or less explain that trajectory. Not all the works of the office, but a few of them. So. What both of these works have to do, probably, and what I think that our office more or less does, is not a lot of theory, not a lot of work without theory, but we try to focus on the subjects that are relevant at a certain moment, or for a certain client, or for a certain situation. So we like, in a way, we like to be on topic, which is, we can do an easy wordplay with utopias. So for us, that, and I know that the Italian team has talked recently about heterotopias, and because I was peering through the glass, architects are very fond of talking about utopias, and probably we are the last people talking about utopias is architects. And of course, all the variables. So ours is ontopias, which is more or less, we would be very glad if everybody would be on topic, talking about the relevant issue. So that's our thing. So this, both this and the film more or less started around this time. Probably the film more. It's a moment when the exhibition, probably most of you were not born at that date, but there was a very important, okay, you were just born. There was a very, supposedly a very important exhibition at MoMA that was called Light Construction. Somebody knows about it? Light Construction? No? Doesn't ring a bell anymore. So everybody was here, and there were our Spanish heroes in the show was Ábalos and Herreros. I was working for them at the time. You know the office, Ábalos and Herreros, more or less. Probably their international fame started here at this exhibition at MoMA. And reading the text by curator Terence Riley, there was a paragraph that defined architects as secret agents for beauty, which is kind of an amazing description for architects. Which I had never heard that description before. For me, it's kind of a weird one, but it resonated with me in the sense that I saw my fellow students or my fellow young architects behaving very much like spies. Before internet. Or internet was widespread, information was power in a different way that it is now. People talked in a hush voices about the situationists because they were just being recovered, and and that was very cool, and only cool people talked about them, and then non-cool people could not talk about them, and so you talked in low voices. So it was kind of a secret agent language, and that was weird for me. So I started this process of researching what, if architecture had anything to do with secret agents or espionage, for that matter. In that same catalog, you saw these plans that were probably redrawn for the exhibition and for the catalog, and they were very lousy plans. They were not beautiful at all. You know. By the way, that you know, something very funny happened is that nobody knows. You know, that description of architects as secret engine for beauty is in between. How do you call this? In quotes, right? So it means that somebody else said it, not Terence Riley, the curator that wrote the text. Somebody else. But it is the only quoted text that has not a footnote. So nobody knows. I asked him, hey, do you know, remember who said that? Because there is no footnote for that. I said, no, I don't remember. So, you know, it's also a secret source that more or less told him that, you know, nobody knows who said that architects were a secret engine for beauty. So anyway, the plans were not beautiful. Were in fact quite clumsy. At that time, there was a magazine that was, I mean, it is still very famous, but at that time was very, very powerful. That actually produced plans like this, but usually much more beautiful. And those plans were part of the success of the magazine. The magazine was El Croquis, and this is how they presented and you recognize this way of presenting, right? It's like overblown, you know, it gives too much information. It's like, you know, they look like the plans of some secret installation, and that somebody got into a vault and, you know, and made a picture of plans that respond more or less to a secret dangerous place somewhere, right? Because you cannot read all the information that is here. Nobody can read it. It's too much information. But all this information that is around the plans kind of sublimates from the plans. It's like this atmosphere that architecture emits, and that architects think that is probably what architecture is all about. So anyway, El Croquis is a little bit more. It's a little bit like somebody would go to these offices of architects of famous architects and stole the plans that were in their safe, you know, and they would photograph them at night, you know, as in the James Bond films, and they would produce these very detailed plans of some very strange thing. So after 2 or 3 years of researching it, this became my PhD dissertation, and I started to know a little. Become a little bit more obsessed with it, and discover more references to this kind of strange language. You know, this guy is Rainer Banham. He was very famous long time before you were born. He died in '86, but he was the historian for Archigram and the historian for Superstudio and for all these cool guys of the 60s. You know, he was the cool historian. He was so cool that, you know, he bought the first foldable bike that was designed, and this is him right in the Nevada desert with his bike. So when he was an engineer and a historian. So he was not an architect, and he never studied architecture per se. He studied engineering. I think it was aeronautic engineering, and he studied art history in the Courtauld Institute. So he thought he was the perfect architect in a way, because, you know, architecture is more or less like these artistic technologies, right? Like some imaginative technologies. That was his definition of architect, which was all along his life. Because and of course it's an interested, you know, it is an interested description, because it was the description that fit him, because he was a technologist and he was, of course, imaginative. So he thought himself that as an architect more than anything else. But at the end of his life, you know, he got cancer, and in the deathbed at the hospital, he wrote his last article. His last article was called "A Black Box: The Secret Profession of Architecture." Again, secrets come up, and this is a very important historian. So in the 20th century, there is like 3-4 historians of architecture that are fundamental, and this is one of them. And at the end, he renounced and he said, "Okay, I was wrong all along. Architecture has nothing to do with engineering or with poetry or with art or with art history, or nothing that I thought of that it meant." Architecture is a secret profession that dealt with by the way, some Italian way of doing things. There is, there is among all the traditions, all the different traditions that the humans used for making habitat. What we learn now comes from the Renaissance, the Italian Renaissance, and that's what we learn. That nothing else. That's the tradition we learn, and that's architecture. And it deals with repetition of patterns, and we learn to recognize patterns, and we do this strange language of diagrams and things that almost nobody else understands. Right? It's like a secret language. So I started to get more engrossed. At this moment, somebody of you will be looking at me. This guy is crazy, like espionage and architecture. So the thesis was, in the end, it could be summed up in one sentence. It's like, we architects do what we do usually in our work is closer to science fiction than anything else. So we are not scientists. We are not artists. We are not writers. But what we do is kind of a mix of the two. We use things to project some possible future, to design some possible future, and that's what we do. We design future regular life. How do you say that in English? I forgot the English word. So anyway, but you understand what I mean. Like future home life, future social life, future relationship with. Among people. That's what we do. It's very close to science fiction. But of course, science fiction has a very low reputation. So we have to hide that very, very much. We have to say all the time that we are either scientists, Le Corbusier and all those guys, or when the postmodern came about, we are all artists. We are not, science, nothing like science. All, we are historians or artists or writers or poets. And we keep going from one side to the other, trying to hide our true nature, right? So anyway, to demonstrate this, it's not too easy because there is not too much literature regarding it. There is nobody said things like this. I think, at least not much. But there is some clues. In around 1911, fantasies of the world were very, very interesting. And very, very precise and very, very accurate to what has happened. It was a moment in which, first radio communications came about, and the radioactivity was more or less discovered, and people actually thought that we would conquer gravity. So this is around 1900. There is some Skype conversation going on. And this is a postcard sold in the streets in France. And this is Life magazine. This is a rich guy snooping on his son that is having fun with his girlfriend, and he's getting nervous. And he's more or less comfortable in his chair, and there is some machine that brings him air from the mountains or from the sea, and there is another machine that gives him sunlight that was gotten somewhere else and transported to him, and you see the detail is his son with his girlfriend, right, in the so there is some kind of drone probably flying silently at about 100 meters from the guy and snooping on him and transmitting real time the information to his parent, to his father. So it's kind of quite an interesting image. So, but around 1911, even more interesting things happened. There is these two pieces of legislation were passed. It's the first time in the world that these two very interesting pieces of legislation were really passed. So the Official Espionage Act in the US and the Official Secrets Act in the UK. I mean, the language is amazing because already this is the first time we have official secrets. Before, we had private secrets or hidden secrets. Nobody was supposed to know nothing. But now you had a secret that was publicly known that you had a secret, but you were not able to know it because it is a secret. But it was publicly known that you had a secret. That's a fun thing. That's very interesting. Same year, you know this guy, right? Everybody knows this. This is the Fagus shoe factory by Walter Gropius. And it's more or less the same thing, right? There is a glass wall that tells you, okay, the inside is more or less a secret, but I let you peer in a little bit, only a little bit. So there is this shift in the limit between what is known and what is not known. You know, this is very interesting. It's a redefinition of public and private. It is a redefinition, of course, of what not only in the sense of the space, but in the sense of knowledge and in the sense of public governance. So before this, in 1909, the FBI was formed. Only 2 years before this, the FBI, the precursor of the FBI was the Pinkerton agency. So it was a private investigator, private eyes. You know, the guys that were looking for the safety of Abraham Lincoln. You know, when he was killed, that was Pinkerton, which is a private enterprise. You know, but from 1909, 1911, around this time, all these things became public. They became part of the public realm, but they were still secret. So it's a funny story because it kind of has to do with architecture. Little time after that, you know, I don't know how you were told the history of architecture, but the impression I got when I learned about Le Corbusier and these guys is that they thought themselves super powerful. They were able to cure sicknesses. They were able to, you know, to how you call this, to avoid war. You know, when Le Corbusier said architecture or revolution, he wasn't promoting a revolutionary architecture. He was more or less saying, if you don't want to have communism in France, you need to hire me, because then I will do cheap houses, and you will not have communists in France, and we will not have a Second World War or something like that. You know, that was more or less the theory. But that argument of you know, about enhanced powers for the human, you know, came. You know, they were first drawn here. Well, first probably with Flash Gordon, but that Flash Gordon was not very believable because he was in the galaxies or whatever. But this guy was on Earth, right? This was the first time he was drawn. This was 38, I think. Yeah, 36, 38, June. This is the first issue of Superman. Superman is a science fictional character. Let's say it is science fictional because the author makes an attempt to explain why Superman is so powerful. So there is kind of, it's not magic, there is some kind of rational explanation. And the interesting part is that it's all about architecture in a way. So when he's a kid, he starts throwing away, furniture, which is part of architecture. Constructing skyscraper at a very high speed, jumping over buildings. Well, this is for engineers. It's running faster than trains, but usually, it's 3-to-1 architects to engineers already. And this is the key frame for the first story of Superman. This is where the after all these explanations, this is what explains everything about the first adventure of Superman. The first adventure means there is a corrupt senator that is having a conversation in his house. Okay? But you need to be Superman to be able to snoop on it. You need to have superpowers to be able to listen on to that conversation. So modern architecture kind of forces you to be Superman in order to be level with architecture. Before, we could argue that, before all these buildings were so high, and we all lived in more or less in more regular height houses, a normal person could come up to the window and listen in. But with modern architecture, that's impossible. You need to be Superman. You need to have superpowers. And all the scenes are this amazing flight through the architecture of this amazing city that is full of modern architecture. So this is more or less the PhD I did, so I had more or less fun. It wasn't very serious, nobody took me seriously. And at the same time I was doing I mean, I was doing a lot of work, not too much, but a few of them have an impact on what you see here. And this is how I got to get this commission, Factoría Cultural, which you see here. This is, you know, the art fair, Arco, in Madrid. It's held, I think, every year in February, more or less, February, March. And it's the typical art fair. And in the early 2000s, there was this policy of making what was called rest spaces, because this is a very visited art fair, even though nobody buys artwork, but people go as if it were like, you know, something nice to do and cool to do. So people get tired of the fair and they had to do rest spaces. And this was the first one. And it was dealing with the fact that maybe you don't need to lie down to rest, but just get away from this level 0 of commerce. So, since I'm not an architect and an artist, and we put this funny name, art as an elevating experience. Sorry. So if you're not sure you can elevate souls, you elevate the bodies, and then you get them to a different height, and maybe that's enough rest, and you exercise different muscles. And they came out more or less okay, and also very cheap. So they were kind of a big success because they allowed for a different view that was not the typical white wall view of 10 meters away, so your eyes more or less rested. You could go up there and watch the fair from the top, okay? And the next year, we did the second version, because these things were, I mean, they were so much cheaper than the rest of the rest spaces that it was quite, you know, you know, even though my opinion was that the director of Arco she was very tired of me. In fact, I think she was more or less happy because it was cheap. And this was the second one, and it's more or less the same argument. It's about going up, but we changed so the first one was with scaffolding, which is for work, for construction work. And the second one is more or less also for construction work. It's one of these elevating platforms. But we just did that orange box in which you could get in and sit down and then have this trip up and down and watch the fair from the top. That person there is the guy that built everything. And he is as much responsible as me for doing it very cheap. And he also did this. He also did Factoría many years later. Pedro. Anyway. So the director of Arco, a few years later, when she had gone away from Arco and she was director of a museum in northern Spain, she called me to make a design also for an exhibition, because already Spain was in a deep crisis and there was almost no money. So I think she remembered the thing that the issue that, you know, the designs that we made were very cheap. So we did. It was a technological art exhibition, and what we did was nothing, almost nothing. These frames that had also this, you know, this. Protection screens that you put around scaffoldings to protect debris from falling to the street. So we covered those frames with those screens, and this was more or less the design that came out. Also very cheap. So in the end, in 2010 or 2011, something like that, when they started designing the project for Factoría Cultural, which is this space you're looking at now. I think they called me because because I was cheap, not because I was very good, but because I was cheap. And I think that's more or less probably the success that the space has, is that it more or less gives a very precise portrait of the Spanish situation and the European situation at large, but mainly the Spanish situation, in which almost we had no money for many years, and we still don't have any money. But it doesn't, the government is always pretending and it's not that way, whatever. But I think that the merit of the space is more about the ability of the work to represent a larger reality than about the design itself. The design itself is not too, it's not that interesting, I think. You can see, there is no images to show because you're here, so there is no sense in showing any images. You more or less see there is only two materials, the wood and the polycarbonate. The wood is Spanish pine, untreated. Spanish pine is good because it's very cheap. It's the cheapest wood ever, at least in Spain. We didn't need to do very fine woodwork, so it didn't matter if the wood is young and wet and it's going to be deformed afterwards. We don't care. And then we used polycarbonate because it's very lightweight, and even though it's kind of expensive, that's very much offset because it was installed in one day. We spend more time measuring. We measured the. I was going to say a bad word because it gave us a lot of trouble. The panels, the polycarbonate panels, or the holes we had for them in our drawings several times, of course, and we made a layout of how to make them with less material, and then we measured again twice once the wood frame was done. So we spent like 3 times more time measuring the polycarbonate than actually installing it, because it was installed in just one day, and that made it very cheap. The light is you see that the wood elements, they're all the same wood elements. It's the same measurement. It's like 18 in the longer dimension. But once you go from up from the floor, you don't need that much section. So that 18 we can cut away, and we cut these elements. And by sheer luck, it was the same amount of elements in the. I'm serious. We didn't plan it. I didn't care. I would put up or throw away the extra ones, but it is exact. In those, if all the cutaways from the vertical elements form these octagonal lighting elements that they are not drilled into the column, they are just tied up. So the electricians did the drilling, but we weren't responsible for electricity because the owners of the space had made an agreement with internet provider for a deal for the internet, and they did all the electrical installation, and they drilled everything. So we were so careful not to drill anything, and they came up. It was horrible day. The entire work that you see here, it cost around 40,000 euros, except the electricity. So that was pretty cheap, and it was good because otherwise they wouldn't have been able to go ahead with it. So if it had been like 110, which is more the average price that they got to make it, they wouldn't have been able to start because it is a private enterprise. So in 2007, I handed in my my dissertation, the espionage thing, the crazy thing. As I tell you, I didn't have any success. Everybody in my school thought I was crazy, more or less, and I was already very tired of writing. So this is a very good disclaimer because everything I say you have to take with a pinch of salt or a kilo of salt, because as you see, I was writing when Spain was building everything, okay? And I started doing competitions when Spain entered into crisis. So I'm not a very good strategist. So you should keep this in mind. So in 2007, I had finished my PhD, and I started doing competitions, lots of them. We won 2 of them that year. One was this, the Civil Registry of Madrid. Important competition for a place that looks like this. Now, it still looks like this, okay? It's a crazy place. You do what you do, I don't know in your countries, but here you do marriages, the ceremonies and inscriptions. You inscribe births, you inscribe families, you inscribe deaths, you inscribe new nationalities, like if you want to become a Spanish national, you go there. So it's full of people. Everybody has to go there at some point. Everybody. So it's like this. It's a crazy place. So we won the competition kind of, again, going on topic, like say, okay, what is this place? Because it's a weird place. It's not like your usual administrative building. It's not like an office building, a regular office building. It doesn't look like an office building. It probably looks more like an airport or a museum, you know, but it doesn't really look like an office building. This is an office building, and it doesn't look good. Even if it has a very large open space, it doesn't really look good. You know, it doesn't look like it corresponds. You know, it looks more like this, which is not good. You know, it may look a little bit more like an airport, but in an airport, you are going to be placed in an airplane later on. So you are, the logic of the airport is to be compressing your bodies closer and closer together until you don't feel anything, okay? Rubbing shoulders with a complete strangers. You know what I mean? Like you're more compressed all the time. So that's not it. It probably looks more like this. This is a serpentine pavilion, see, but this is in a park. So we thought, yeah, this looks correct for a campus, because this was in the middle of the campus of justice in Madrid. It was a new place where all the justice departments would be, all the whatever. You know what I mean? So that was the campus, and that was all the buildings. Ours was at the entrance, and we said, okay, what should we do? Maybe what we do is just, design how to close in the simplest way a slice of the park, and have the people do their paperwork in the park. So could we achieve that? And it turned out that it was not too difficult to achieve. I mean, it was easier than we at first thought. So this is the characteristic of the division between public and private space in the civil registry. So the 81% is public access. So people from outside can access 81% of the space in that building. Only 19 was for private access for the workers. The average in the rest of the campus was between 20 and 40%. Ours was 81, so it was very different, very different kind of animal. And we explained this, and I think we won because of this, because we were lagging. I mean, we had been selected among 120, and then we were asked to respond to a series of questions for 3 months. Okay, and this is more or less the explanation that we didn't change a lot, and we came up with this more precise explanation of why we had done it that way. So you cannot. I mean, you cannot design the same thing the same way, this thing and this other thing. So this is what they had planned for the civil registry: 5 floors, and the colored part is the public access, and the blank part is the private access of each floor that they had in mind. So if you take out all the private access areas, it's more or less only twice the size of the archive. The archive was also the largest in the campus, because the entire society is there. It's like the X-rays of the society. So if you put the archive, instead of putting underground and making like a crap feature of the ground, you elevate it one floor, just one floor, then the entire program of the civil registry, it's either underneath or on top, and all the transfer of paperwork is very easy. Then if you take that disk of the archive and kind of manipulate it a little bit, then you can achieve something like this, in which all the program is either at the access level, one down or one up. So it's very easy to navigate. So that's more or less what we explained, and it was kind of successful. This is what they had, and kind of bad. So we said, put that way, and you kind of make it more precise. And you cannot see the red very well, but anyway, this is what they had, and whatever. It's not very important. The envelope was a little bit more technologically advanced, that probably or demanding than a regular building, but since it was half the area, two-thirds of the area, it could offset one for the other. So this is more or less what we had. And the thing about this project is that in those 3 months, remember I had just written my dissertation, okay? And I had been 2 years writing it and not doing a lot of other works. And I didn't have a lot of money, and I was paying 2 people with not a lot of money. And every day that we went to the office, the people at my office were saying, okay, how can we win this? Because if we won that commission, they would have work as well, not only me, but them too. So it was this tense situation in which they said, it was a weird situation for us. It was the first time we were selected for a 2-phase competition, and and I suddenly realized that architects do that all the time. It wasn't very special. In fact, it's very common. And architects do that, and not very many other professions do that in the same way that architects do. So there is everybody competes in a way, and everybody collaborates in a way. So there is this balance between collaboration and competition. But architects do it in a special way, because we have this fantasy that we are in the art history books again. So this balance between science and art, or art history, or whatever. So we have this fantasy that we are artists, right? More or less. Almost every architect, every ambitious, kind of upcoming architect or student architect, we think that we're kind of mini artists, right? Oh, we're in the art history books. Architecture is in the art history books. But of course, we deal with public money. So we have to compete for that public money. There is no way that we are going to be handed that money just like that. So we have to compete. So we are probably the only or the last artists to compete in the public all the time. There is nobody else like that. In the Roman times and Greek times, also poets competed in public all the time. They did what it was called the flower games, or the flower, you can say, something like that. Flower games. It was poetry games, and all these poets came about and recited their poems, new poems, and there were these juries of other poets, and in the one hand there was the public that had a vote, and then there was the jury of poets that had other votes. And the one that got together all the more votes was the poet that won. And there was this also, there were all kinds of problems that were very much modern today in that sense. And architects, okay, there is this funny anecdote about many years ago, and Vitruvius wrote his 10 books because he hated. He hated the fact that he was short, that he was ugly, and that he was very bad at relating to the rich people. So he had no connections. Okay, he had no connections. He was not smart and and good looking, and so he was not very much taken into consideration for commissions. Okay, and he said, okay, Octavius, I'm writing this book so that you know how to choose architects. Okay, so you know a little bit about architecture and about how to choose architects. And the way you choose architects is the way you choose poets. The same way. You do a jury of other poets, of other architects, and then you choose the best. Don't do like Alexander. There is this fantastic anecdote about the architect of Alexandria. You remember this? It's drawn everywhere. There was this, and Vitruvius describes this architect that is tall, all the contrary that he is. He's tall, he's handsome, he wears a lion skin, and lion skin is good, it's good fashion, and he has all the body in oil, so he's shiny and amazing. He's an amazing guy, right? And he goes to Alexander and gets the audience because he also has friends. He has a good friend of him that gets him the audience with the Emperor Alexander. Alexander, the great Alexander. So he hates the fact that this guy is good looking and also has a friend. I mean, good looking, Alexander was gay. Okay, so being good looking is also good. This architect has this friend in between him and Alexander that makes the connection. So that's corruption. That's no way to choose an architect. It's an amazing story. It's the most interesting story in the entire fucking 10 books. There is nothing like that in the rest of the book. There is nothing so interesting. So we had 3 months to do this second phase, and in the first 1.5 months, I had the idea of, okay, we have to do something with this. And it was just it took me 5 seconds to have the entire project in mind because, what do you do? It's very simple. You don't do a book. It's boring. A book. I don't know how to do books. But competition is already its own thriller. The script is already done. It's a natural film. I don't even have to do anything. The script is done, and there is a resolution at the end. So there is all these actors that fight, and in the end, you have a winner. So it's a good film. I didn't have to do anything. So, and I said to them, okay, next thing we do is, it's not another competition, but a film about competitions. They laughed at me. Okay, my team laughed at me. 1 week after we handed in this and presented this project, we presented, applied for a small grant in Fundación Arte y Derecho. It's a visual artists association that they get, they get some money together every year or every 2 years, and they do this call for grants for artistic projects. So we got this grant. I don't know, it was 5,000 or 10,000 euros, and it allowed us to start the process. We spent our first idea was to make a film about competitions in general, talk about this, the funny story about Vitruvius and all, these kind of things, and also have one competition. Try to get a client that was doing a competition, trying to talk to him before it was all designed, and convince him that maybe it was cool to document it. And so that was the idea, to see if we got a client and we could get incorporated into the process. And for that, we needed to find the client before the competition was public, because once it's public, the set of rules is already, set, and you cannot possibly include a documentary there because it's crazy. So when we present in the press, I don't know, the press event for this building, another one, and it was also the opening for an exhibition about the entire campus in, I think it was February 2008. We met a person. I spent the next, I mean, since we handed this design, this was December 2007, I spent half a year trying to go out to events more often than I usually do. I don't like to go out, but so I made a point of going out almost every night, to something. And you say, who are you? Whatever. I'm an architect. And I say, well, I'm an architect, but I'm trying to do a film. Wouldn't you know by any chance a client, a rich person that is doing a competition for a building, but the competition is not open yet. It's not, it's not public yet. I say, and people look at me, they look at you and say, this guy is crazy. I don't know that. But one person at that opening said, maybe. I said, what? Well, maybe she took my phone. 3 months later, I had already forgotten, and they said, can you come to Andorra next week? I said, of course. That was June. Of course, whenever you want. So we met the Minister of I met the Minister of Andorra, and it took 5 minutes. In 5 minutes, the deal was done, because they had already talked about it, of course, and they had thought that it was a good idea. That if they made the museum, there was a slight chance that the documentary was successful. Nobody knew, but if it was successful, it could be nice for the museum. And so they said, yeah, go ahead. And we only asked them, like, I don't know, 2 or 3 things, and they said yes to everything. So we told them, okay, we are the owners of the film. It's not a commission, and it's, we are not going to have a say in the edition of the film. They said yes. You have to put that we have to access both the architect's offices all the time, and that we have to access the jury meetings also. So that has to be in the brief. And there was another one. I don't remember what it was. Well, no, it wasn't a condition. It was more like a question. I asked him, okay, what happens? Because I already knew. There is a funny anecdote, but I don't know if we have time. But if so, I'll tell you later. But I already knew that most probably one architect would go away, Foster, because I had been to his office and I knew that it was impossible to put a camera inside. So once I knew that Foster had already been selected, because they already had the 5 architects selected. Okay. So the rules for the first phase were already over, and they had to design the rules for the second phase. So we were lucky in a way. They said, if only one architect, goes away because of the film, we keep the film. If 2 architects go away because of the film, we keep the architects. So there was this interesting situation after Foster dropped out, in which we couldn't very much fight, right? Because once, if any other architect actually said, okay, we are, too scared about the cameras or whatever, we don't want to, these guys are horrible, then we would lose the project. So it was okay. We were able to get the deal and make the film, but after Foster dropped out, we were in a very weak position. So there was this, again, I think it was very much the success that the film has. Of course, there is something that I cannot be naive about it. The biggest success is the architects. They are very famous, and they are very, everybody knows them, and it's amazing to get inside to know them. I would have been happy with any competition, to film any, like a very local competition. I would be totally happy. I would have been totally happy. But we ended up with this very high level one. So the film is has, I don't think it's a very, again, as with Factoría, I don't think that the merit or the fame or the success is not related to very much to the film itself, a little bit maybe, but more to the fact that it represents very well a time. It represents very well a time when architects have been more or less mediatic, and they have been well known, and they have drawn crowds with the Guggenheim effect. So after the Guggenheim, there is this there is this space for spectacular architecture, and that's, you know, and we are kind of portraying it, and that's more or less the success of the film, that it portrays a time very well. So it's not really about, you know, that we did it much better than other things, or that Factoría is better than other things that we have done. Probably no, but it represents a time better than other things. So it in a way, the conclusion we have is that first, you know, so this is what I was explaining. First is that we like to be on topic, which is I think it helps to be able to, but then you have to, you know, be a little bit lucky so that the topic is relevant, and that it's more or less serves to portray a situation that is larger than yourself in a way. So, how many people of EASA? So everybody here is from EASA more or less, but except a few, okay. But I was going to introduce one tiny snippet of information that is not relevant to, I mean, it's not like, so it's about the future. And is that we are going to do the film that we didn't get to make in the first place, because our film was two-faced. So it has this aspect about competitions in general, and then about the one competition. So the film ended up being one competition because it was too much fun, and we didn't want to water it down, and we didn't want it to make it 3 hours long. So now we are making the second film, the one about Vitruvius. So it's fun. So it's gonna be fun. It's you know, the Alexander architect is gonna be there, which imagine with the lion dress and all. We already have like 40 interviews with amazing people. Like we have fantastic interviews from a few people, like the president of the Basque Country when the Guggenheim was made, admitting on camera that the competition was rigged in favor of Frank. So it's the first time that a public official says, "Oh, the competition was rigged." You know, amazing. An amazing interview with Rem and. So we're doing this other project, and probably this fall. I'm not sure because I'm going a little bit. I think it's gonna be this fall. Okay, let's say it's gonna be this fall. We're gonna make a Kickstarter campaign to get a little funds for this, and we will give the first movie, you know, with as one of the prizes or whatever. But the most important thing is that we want to be able to explain the matter in the most comprehensive way possible, and for that we are doing our first editorial public offering. You know, instead of initial public offerings that the films do with, you know, what this is the put money. We are looking for ideas about competitions. So we would like you guys at EASA to become kind of our partners in this, if you can, because for us it's an amazing coincidence that the EASA team in Spain wanted us to present something, and then we are at this precise point in which we are trying to start the second part. And for us, so the fact that you cover around 40 countries, if I'm not mistaken, more or less, it's an amazing opportunity because it gives us a very good view of how competitions are, what they are in many more countries than the ones I more or less know about. Okay, so for us it's an amazing opportunity, and we would like you to become part of it. Another is that, we can offer many kind of deals because we are not a regular producing company. We are just a small architectural office, so we can do anything. We can do editorial public offering, but we can do also embassy public offerings. So you can. There is something that has in our dealings. So we are not a distribution office. Also, we don't have distribution for the first film, but we have gotten very good distribution. Not distribution, like partnership deals with one or two places, like Mexico. It was amazing. There's this Bureau Verde Architecture Office, and they did a projection for the film for 5,000 people. I was there. It was like rock star. You know, the only time in my life that I was rock star status is that time. It was amazing. And they project the competition film, you know, all over Mexico, and it's kind of, you know, they can get a little money for it, but they also get public discussion going on. So what I mean is that they don't lose a lot of money doing it, because you always lose money doing these things. I mean, there is no money in it. But you can get a little, you know, a little back, so that it more or less kind of offsets the how you say, the hassle. And there is also a very good partnership with Belgium. But anyway, I'm probably too long already on this issue. So, you know, if any of you wants to become, you know, involved in this second part or the first part or whatever, please come back to us, okay? We'll be very, very, very grateful that you are more or less willing to do so, okay? So this is our thing. Thank you so much, and I'm here for any questions. I don't know how much time we have. In fact, we are very bad with time. Oh no, we have 10 minutes. Yeah, I think so. I think they want to tape you and record you.
Yeah.
Should be on. No, it's on. It's on. No. Yeah.
Hello. Okay. Yeah, I just have one question, because right in the beginning, when you were starting talking about superpowers, I found it super interesting that, like, I never ever realized that Superman is somehow a huge critique on Corbusier, because like the Towards an Architecture was published something around that time, and it's about
a little bit before.
Yeah, a bit before, but it, like, that was just what I realized when seeing the comic. It was like constructions, cars, cities, and I don't know if there was another thing that Corbusier mentioned in his...
Mainly cities, yeah, mainly cities.
And it was like, who is the founder of...
Superman?
Superman.
He was, again, like Vitruvius, he was probably, you know, a fantastic guy, Jew from New York, very tiny. You know, imagine Woody Allen, okay? You know, kind of smallish and kind of slightly ugly Jew from New York that said, okay, my God, I'm having so little success with women. You know, if I were able to jump over buildings, this is precisely what he said, okay? If I were to be able to jump over buildings, I would probably be much more noticed and have more success with women. So he said, maybe this is a cool story, you know? So maybe it's not very conscious, but some subconscious is that the new cities we have, the new architecture, is superhuman, you know, and I mean, it's also very psychoanalytical. You have to have this super ego and this super person to be able to be in level with architecture, with the new architecture. You know, so that's why, you know, you need to be Superman to be listening to this fucking corrupt, you know, senator. That's a fantastic story. I mean, I love the story. This first Superman, it's lovely.
So the founder's name is Vitruvius.
Jerry Siegel. Jerry Siegel. Siegel. Can I have a writing element thing here? Is, you know, I hate this. I usually like to write. You know, we lost this ability, right? Now it's all images.
Thank you. And thank you as well for the lecture. Like, I wanted to say that first, actually. Like, thank you very much. It was super inspiring, and thank you for being here.
Well, thank you. No, thank you.
Anyone else?
No?
Hello?
It's on.
Hello? You hear me? Oh, okay. Cool. Yeah. So it's just so it's very interesting. It's something. It's not a topic that's really raised much. Like when again, like you were saying there, Laura, about Superman, but like the architecture uses a form of control, and a lot of the secrecy that goes into it, like a lot of the corruption between a lot of projects, and you do see it around. For example, one of the bids there, the Italian bid, they on Sardinia, where the G8 was supposed to be held, and then like something like 3 months before the event, they just pulled out. And I just think it's quite interesting that we don't really often hear about these things, and it's not something we learn in college.
Sorry?
It's not, we don't learn this in school.
College?
Yeah.
There is no book about this.
No. It's great to hear. Like.
There is no. Thank you. I think they want to.
Okay. You showed a rendering from the competition where you worked for 3 months on it or something.
Yeah.
Did you win it or?
Yeah, we won it.
Okay.
We won it.
So the project is done already?
No.
Okay.
When we had, once we were through with this, after, in January 2008, I had in my hands, I won this competition. It was very big. I mean, it was quite big. It was a nice project to do, okay? And this film, that I already had 10,000 euros for the film, and I think it was around 40,000 euros for the prize money for the competition. And then, of course, I think the final money for all the work for the building, it was around 1 million euros. So, I mean, of course, you don't get all the, you have to, most of that goes, you have to start giving it away, no? But it was nice because I thought, okay, I'm pretty well off, so maybe I don't do the film, but it's good that I'm going to do the building. I ended up doing the film, not the building. So the building was, it was subject to a lot of political controversy. After the summer of 2008, everything changed. Lehman Brothers collapsed. And architects usually are very, we are very, I don't know in other countries, but in the two that I studied, architects are usually very insecure of their own discipline. As architects, we are insecure, right? We feel insecure. More than other, it's like Spaniards. The Spaniards are always insecure about their own Spanishness. Architects reminds me very much of Spaniards. It's like the most insecure people, architects. We don't look at outside, but because it is true, we are not scientists, we are not artists. Everybody else can, we are, or sportsman. You are clearly defined, right? We are not. We're kind of crap. We're not this, we're not this, we're not that, we're not, But we have all these very high ambitions. So we are in the middle of, this high ambition and low self-esteem. So it's kind of crazy. So it's kind of, it was subject to all these, all the campus of justice. The crisis in Spain was very real estate oriented, and everything that looked like buildings, it was cancelled. You could do roads, no problem. You could do high-speed train, which is a lot more expensive and much less useful. That's no problem because you cannot see it. What do you see in high-speed train? Just one train. It's always the same. It looks like it's the same train all the time, right? The high-speed. The same train goes everywhere. You only spend one train and something railway that you don't see. So it's not expensive, but buildings look expensive, right? So everything gets mixed together, and it was cancelled. It was. The thing about the insecurity was about something else, but okay, I lost the argument there. I will recover it.
Maybe you don't know, but I don't think that all Spanish architects are insecure because we're living in a really nice habitat.
No. Maybe some Spanish architects are not insecure. Believe me, and some of them are. Spaniards as a society are very insecure. They are very insecure. Yeah, more than other societies. And architects I recognize architects as being very insecure also, more than other disciplines. That's my impression. That's my impression. Very definite impression. In fact, my students are always trying to avoid architecture all the time. For a design, they usually refer to all kinds of other disciplines instead of architecture. It's now changing a little bit because some other more disciplinary things have become fashionable, but for, let's say, 30 years, that was the case. And it comes and and goes. But anyway, yeah, I mean, this is a generalization, okay? So there is all kinds of things. In particular, people are not like that, but...
Are you still an architect or more a filmmaker now?
No, we are an architectural office. I don't think we could have done the film if we were not architects. No. I mean, who would want to make a film about architects? Boring, I remember that when I was a kid, I was utterly bored by architects. I hated technical drawing. I was probably 10 or 11 when I first saw architectural documentary, and it was boring as hell. It was hateful. So who would want to make something that is so hateful? It's impossible. No. Architecture, I mean, there is no, now that, we started this in 2007, before all this fashion of doing series about all these professions and crazy professions that you follow, right? And it's enthralling. But there is no one about architects. There is fiction series about lawyers, doctors, mafia, police, and then there is non-fiction series about fishermen, construction, engineers, whatever. No architects. They're boring. They're most boring. That was the most boring documentary I ever saw. And I have to admit that it was more or less cool because it had a time lapse of a building made. They tried, but it was hateful. And then I end up doing, it's crazy. Life is crazy.
Okay, so this is the end of the conference. We are going to cordially invite you to go out, and you can continue talking to Ángel if you want, but outside, okay, because we are, Matadero
closes.
Kick our asses. so
okay.
We have to
we need to
close.
Go. Okay, thank you so much.